Shedeur Sanders just showed up to something he didn't have to attend. Voluntary workouts kicked off in Cleveland, and while the word voluntary means exactly what it sounds like, no obligation, no requirement, no consequences for staying home, Sanders walked through those facility doors anyway. And if you understand what's actually at stake right now, if you know what this offseason represents for his career, then you already know why that choice matters more than most people realize. This wasn't just about getting some early work in. This wasn't about staying in shape or killing time before mandatory sessions begin. This was a statement. This was Shedeur Sanders telling Todd Monken, telling his teammates, telling the entire organization that he's not waiting for opportunities to come to him. He's creating them. And in a quarterback competition where perception can shift momentum just as much as performance, showing up when you don't have to might be the smartest move he's made all offseason. Let's be clear about what voluntary actually means in the context of NFL offseason programs, because there's a massive difference between how fans interpret it and how it actually functions inside a locker room. Voluntary means players can't be punished for not attending. It means the coaching staff can't hold absences against you officially. It means if you're an established veteran with years of film, with proven production, with a contract that guarantees your role, you can stay home and nobody's going to question your commitment. But if you're a young quarterback trying to solidify a starting position, if you're coming off a rookie season where you got limited opportunities and inconsistent support, if you're walking into an off-season where everything is about to be decided, then voluntary stops feeling optional real fast. Because while the attendance might be voluntary, the evaluation sure isn't. Here's what most people miss when they hear about voluntary workouts. They think it's just extra practice. They think it's about getting a head start on conditioning or learning the playbook a few weeks early. And sure, those things matter. But the real value of showing up to voluntary sessions when you're in Shedeur Sanders' position has nothing to do with physical preparation. It's about positioning. It's about creating a narrative before anyone else even gets the chance to write one. Because when you're the first quarterback in the building, when you're the one working with the coaching staff while others are still on vacation, when you're building chemistry with receivers during sessions that don't count on any official record, you're setting the tone for how everyone views the competition before it even officially starts. Todd Monken is leading these 3-day voluntary workouts, and that detail matters more than it might seem on the surface. This isn't some assistant running drills with whoever shows up. This is the offensive coordinator, the person who controls the entire offensive system, the coach who will call plays on Sundays, the decision maker who has the most influence over who starts at quarterback. And Shedeur Sanders just gave himself 3 full days of direct access to Monken before the formal competition begins. 3 days to ask questions about the system. 3 days to show how quickly he processes information. 3 days to demonstrate his work ethic, his football IQ, his ability to retain coaching. That's not just practice. That's an extended job interview happening before anyone else even submitted their application. Reports suggest that Sanders showing up sends a clear message about his seriousness and commitment to winning the starting job. And in a league where coaching staffs are constantly evaluating not just talent but mentality, not just physical tools but mental approach, those signals matter enormously. Because when Monken walks into the first official team meeting and starts distributing reps, when he's deciding who gets first-team opportunities and who's working with the second unit, he's going to remember who was in the building during voluntary sessions. He's going to remember who treated optional work like it was mandatory. And whether it's conscious or subconscious, that's going to influence how he views the competition. This is the first time Shedeur Sanders gets to actually work with Todd Monken in a meaningful way. Sure, they've had conversations. They've probably gone through some film together. Monken has certainly evaluated Sanders from a distance, watching tape, studying his mechanics, analyzing his decision-making. But there's a massive difference between evaluating a player on film and actually working with him on the field. And these 3 days represent Sanders' first real opportunity to show Monken in person what he can do, how he operates, how he responds to coaching. That's a chance you don't waste if you're trying to win a starting job. Monken has been publicly excited about Sanders' skill set, particularly his mobility and arm talent. He's coming off 3 years coordinating for Lamar Jackson, one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in NFL history, and he's talked about how much he values quarterbacks who can create off-script and extend plays with their legs. Sanders fits that profile, but fitting a profile on paper and proving you can execute that system in real time are two completely different things. And right now, during these voluntary sessions, Sanders is getting the chance to prove it without the pressure of official evaluations, without media watching every rep, without the weight of a formal competition hanging over each throw. It's been said that building early rapport with your offensive coordinator can be the difference between getting the benefit of the doubt and getting benched after one bad game. If Monken sees Sanders putting in work during voluntary sessions, if he sees the dedication and the effort to master the system before anyone else, that builds trust. That creates a foundation where Monken is more likely to be patient through mistakes, more willing to scheme around Sanders' strengths, more invested in his success. And in a quarterback competition where the margins are thin, where one bad practice or one rough preseason game could shift momentum, having your coordinator already invested in your development is a massive advantage. Here's the hidden value of voluntary workouts that doesn't get talked about enough. These sessions aren't just about quarterbacks and coaches. They're about quarterbacks and receivers. They're about timing routes, building chemistry, developing the kind of rhythm that can't be taught in a classroom or developed in walkthroughs. It's about throwing real passes to real targets and starting to develop the connection that makes an offense actually function. And Shedeur Sanders just gave himself a 3-day head start on building that chemistry, while some of his competition might still be sitting at home. When you're a young quarterback trying to establish yourself, every rep matters. Every throw you complete builds confidence. Every route you time correctly creates muscle memory. Every conversation you have with a receiver about adjustments or reads strengthens the trust between you. And all of that is happening right now during these voluntary sessions for Sanders, while the formal competition hasn't even started yet. By the time mandatory workouts begin, by the time Watson and Gabriel, if they weren't there, show up and start going through their own evaluation process, Sanders will already have days of work with these receivers under his belt. He'll already know their tendencies. He'll already understand their speed and how they come out of breaks. He'll already have built relationships that make communication smoother and adjustments faster. That's not a small advantage. That's the kind of edge that shows up in training camp when one quarterback looks more comfortable in the system than the others. That's what creates separation when coaches are evaluating who looks ready to run the offense and who's still figuring things out. And Sanders just positioned himself to have that edge by showing up when he didn't have to. Because while talent matters, while arm strength and accuracy and decision-making are all critical, there's also something to be said for simply putting in more work than everyone else. And that's exactly what's happening here. There's been some discussion about whether veterans like Myles Garrett should be attending these voluntary workouts, with media personalities debating whether star players have an obligation to show up and support the new coaching staff. And honestly, that entire conversation misses the point completely. Because the expectations for a player like Myles Garrett, someone who's been to multiple Pro Bowls, someone who's the unquestioned leader of the defense, someone whose role and production are already established, are completely different from the expectations for a young quarterback trying to win a starting job. Garrett doesn't need to prove anything to Todd Monken. His film speaks for itself. His production is undeniable. His commitment has been demonstrated over years of elite performance. But Shedeur Sanders is in a completely different situation. He's coming off a rookie season where he didn't get first-team reps in training camp, where he had to fight for every opportunity, where the coaching staff that drafted him didn't seem fully committed to his development. And now he's walking into an offseason with a new offensive coordinator who does believe in him, who does see his potential, who does want to build around his skill set. This is Sanders' chance to capitalize on that support. This is his opportunity to show that the belief is justified. And you don't do that by treating voluntary workouts as optional. You do it by showing up and making the most of every single opportunity to separate yourself from the competition. The reality is that different players are in different phases of their careers, and what makes sense for a veteran doesn't necessarily make sense for a young player trying to establish himself. Garrett has earned the right to manage his offseason however he wants. Sanders is still earning that right. And the fastest way to earn it is by outworking everyone else, by being the first one in the building and the last one to leave, by treating every opportunity like it's critical to his development. Because right now it is. Now let's talk about what Sanders showing up to voluntary workouts potentially means for the quarterback competition itself, because this move didn't happen in a vacuum. Whether Deshaun Watson attended these sessions, whether Dillon Gabriel was there, those details matter in terms of how the competition is being perceived both inside and outside the building. If Sanders was the only quarterback who showed up, if he's getting 3 days of work with Monken while his competition stayed home, that sends a very specific message about who wants it more. That creates a narrative that's hard to shake even when the formal competition begins. It's been said that these small moments, these choices that happen before anyone's officially keeping score, often end up mattering more than people realize. Because coaches notice everything. They notice who's in the building early. They notice who's asking extra questions. They notice who's putting in optional work. And all of that contributes to the internal evaluation that happens behind closed doors. The conversations coaches have about who's ready and who needs more development, who's bought in and who's just going through the motions. Sanders just made sure that when those conversations happen, his name comes up in a positive context. Even if Watson and Gabriel did attend, even if all 3 quarterbacks showed up and put in work, Sanders still positioned himself correctly by being there. Because the absolute worst thing he could have done in this situation is given anyone a reason to question his commitment or his desire to be the starter. By showing up, by treating voluntary like mandatory, by maximizing every opportunity to work with Monken and build chemistry with his teammates, Sanders eliminated any possibility of that narrative-taking route. And in a competition where perception can shift momentum just as much as performance, that's a smart, calculated move that shows maturity beyond his years. So what does all of this actually mean when you step back and look at the bigger picture? It means Shedeur Sanders understands something that a lot of young players don't figure out until it's too late. He understands that winning a starting job in the NFL isn't just about being the most talented player in the room. It's about being the most prepared. It's about building relationships with coaches and teammates. It's about creating advantages in places where your competition isn't looking. It's about controlling the narrative before anyone else gets the chance to write it. And by showing up to voluntary workouts, by giving himself extra time with Monken, by building chemistry with receivers before the formal competition even begins, Sanders is doing all of those things simultaneously. This isn't just about 3 days of practice. This is about positioning himself as the quarterback who wants it most, who's willing to do whatever it takes, who's not leaving anything to chance. Because Sanders knows his situation better than anyone. He knows he's coming off a rookie year where he didn't get a fair opportunity. He knows there are people who still doubt whether he's ready to be a full-time starter. He knows that Deshaun Watson's name still carries weight even if his recent production doesn't. And he knows that the only way to silence all of that noise, the only way to make the decision obvious, is by outworking everyone and making it impossible for the coaching staff to justify starting anyone else. Reports suggest that this offseason is critical for Sanders' development, that the foundation he builds now will determine his trajectory for years to come. And based on how he's approaching these voluntary workouts, based on the choice to show up when he didn't have to, It's clear he understands exactly what's at stake. This isn't a player who's taking anything for granted. This isn't someone who thinks the job is already his just because he finished last season as the starter. This is a quarterback who's treating every opportunity like it matters, because in his situation, it does. And that mentality, that understanding of what it takes to win and keep a starting job in this league, might end up being just as valuable as any physical tool he brings to the position. Voluntary workouts are just the beginning. These 3 days will lead into organized team activities, which will lead into minicamp, which will lead into training camp, which will eventually lead to the preseason, and then the regular season. But everything that happens during that progression builds on the foundation being established right now. And Shedeur Sanders just made sure that his foundation is being built on the right principles, with the right approach, with the right mentality. He showed up when he didn't have to. He put in work when it was optional. He started building chemistry and learning the system before anyone was officially keeping score. And all of that is going to pay dividends when the real evaluation begins. Because here's the reality that a lot of young players don't understand until it's too late. The competition doesn't start when coaches say it starts. It starts the moment you have the opportunity to get better, to build relationships, to create separation. And by treating these voluntary workouts like they matter, Shedeur Sanders just proved he understands that. He's not waiting for the official competition to begin. He's already competing. He's already working. He's already doing everything he can to make sure that when Todd Monken has to make a decision about who starts week 1, the choice is obvious. And based on how he's approaching this offseason so far, based on the maturity and intentionality he's showing, it's getting harder and harder to imagine that choice going any other way.